Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. Please take a second to subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. This episode is the concluding portion of the DGA Special Projects Committee's recent event, the Craft the Director, Ron Howard. The event was the fifth in this series of conversations with master filmmakers that feature an in-depth discussion about the directing process, from pre-production through post. If you haven't listened to the first portion of this event, please check your podcast feed for the previous episode. Now please enjoy part 2 of Mr. Howard's discussion with fellow director Jeremy Kagan in front of a virtual audience. In this episode, they discuss how blocking can improve a scene that lacks vigor, technical and craft-oriented concerns of A Beautiful Mind and Apollo 13, and why Mr. Howard hates shooting endings.
In dealing with a staging situation where you're in rehearsal, this is before, because there are two times of rehearsal. There's the rehearsal, if you're lucky enough to have that before you're actually shooting the picture, and there's the rehearsal the first thing in the morning of what you're doing with them.
Right.
And I know you have the blocking that I often see in lots of your movies is very, very fluid. I was just looking at a scene from the paper where everybody comes into Michael Keaton's office, and it's a delicious scene with lots of people.
Yes.
And the question that I'm asking is, when you're first rehearsing, if that got to be rehearsed before you were on set, what's your process of, okay, I'm going to deal with movement? Do you rehearse essentially in a process of let's work at a table and discuss, or are you letting them get up? What are you doing?
I start with the table and kind of trying to problem solve, anticipate, issues, raise smart questions. I usually say I'd like to get all the questions out of the way here so that, we're not dealing with anything difficult on the day. If you have a question, we'll face it, of course, but I really want you to plug into the material now and help us. I try to have the writer there if at all possible. And it's not just a read through. It's a number of times, and we revisit. And then if the blocking is going to be, like an aspect of the scene, and there are a lot of people, I definitely will get them up on their feet and start working it. I love blocking. I love it. I mean, as an actor, I always found it important. And it staging can help make a line work, can help make a moment work. I begin to understand a little bit more about cutting patterns and shot making, kind of around the movement. And I try to build that more around the actors than the camera. Although if I know that there's a certain thing I'm going to want to be doing on some kind of circular Steadicam or something where I know I'm going to need them to do something that's a little artificial, I can start to work that in so that I can see whether that's going to be, an impediment to their performance or something that they can really work with. And they can start to anticipate that so they're not surprised on the day that there's this sort of mechanical piece of staging in the middle of the otherwise fluid scene. And so, again, it's sort of different days and different scenes just demand something else. There are movies where I haven't blocked anything because it was not necessary. It was all emotional. It was all psychological. And the blocking was, walk up and sit down at the table. It was, and you might as well just do that on the set because, you're there, what your light is, you know what you're going to want to stage for, and there's nothing complicated about it.
If you have, like in that particular scene that I was mentioning, a lot of people that are coming in and out of something, you may have in your preconception and pre-design an idea of how this scene would be staged. Now here are the actors. And as you said, each actor is motivated in different ways. Some actors will look for the first chair that they can sit in. And others will be in and out of a room. And the question is, how do you design all of that?
If a thing like that scene, a complicated staging scene like that has usually begun on my shot list, like drafts before, to the point where by the time we're shooting, I've carried over the notes. And it'll be, I think it'd be great if the actor led us from here to there from one character over to the other and back. Wouldn't that be interesting? And then I just test it, during the rehearsal to see if that works. And then if it's complicated like that, then I usually video the rehearsal so we can really remember later what we did, and keep track of it. But then it's pretty carefully shot listed. And the thing about the actor who wants to sit, or even the actor who doesn't want to do the close up, back to Wilford, when they know that you are willing to say yes, you are willing to listen, it's much, much easier to say, no, not this time. No, this moment I just got to have. And there's a little give and take going on there. And so it doesn't then, they don't become sort of recalcitrant because out of some principle.
I want to go back to two ideas. One, because you just mentioned it, and it also relates again to your team and your assistant directors, is actual scheduling, which is so crucial. And sometimes you get caught with the last scene suddenly is shot in the beginning or whatever. Are there things that you have learned that when you're sitting down and doing the board, these are things that I want you to know about as we're doing that board?
Yeah, it's as frustrating as it can be to try to project ahead and imagine how long something is going to take, for example. Or to begin to estimate that, or can this 3.5 pages actually be achieved? It is. I think it's really important to do that because you begin to understand what the parameters of the day are. But it's also so does the assistant director, and the cinematographer, and you can begin to sort that out ahead of time. And it also can influence in ways that sometimes can be really additive. Like, it's that idea of give yourself a problem, and sometimes the solution is much more inspired than what you would have done with, all resources at your disposal. Yep. It pushes you into making something more fluid and not as much coverage, perhaps, or so it's with live action directing. I always feel like that the logistics and the weather are, they're these X factors, and sometimes they cause you, they compromises that you're going to forever suffer with, but often there are gifts there too, do
you remember a gift? Because oftentimes I love the idea that sometimes what was unexpected, what was in fact, quote, accidental, not in terms of safety, but accidental, ends up being something that is a gift.
It often has to do with time pressure, and it has to do with the light I've found and my staging, and which sometimes it's a little familiar, a little traditional, and once in a while the light will push you into a situation where you can take advantage of something amazing if you just do it in another way that you hadn't really contemplated. So we're not getting the sunset, but we're getting fog. But where does the fog look great? Oh, not over by this tree. It looks good over by that rock. Oh, well, why are they on a rock? Let's figure it out real quickly. Oh, they're on top of the rock. They're sitting on the rock. Oh, okay, let's roll. Climb up on the rock. And suddenly it's a lot more interesting than some traditional sort of sitting under the tree scene, for example. I've never done that scene, by the way.
Ready to
now I have an idea. I'd like to find a good rock.
or a good fog.
And stage a scene there.
Now you have a choice. It's going to be seen outside the window because that's the only place that it's going to be able to be shot. In terms of emotional scenes or endings, in terms of board and schedule, right, are you thinking that through? Where do you want it to happen if you can?
Well, every great AD is trying to help you figure out what to start with and what to finish with and make it fit within the parameters of your budget and time. None of the ADs I work, be thoughtless about that. And when there's going to be a compromise, it usually comes up early. I hate shooting endings. It just that's when I toss and turn in the night. I feel anxiety all day long. Endings are so important to films, and so I'm always anxious on that day, and always kind of happy to put it off as long as possible. But I actually would never want to shoot the ending on the last day, because I feel like you're always fighting the schedule on the last day, but I'd rather be doing something that we can be loose and casual about in those last couple of days of shooting. Sometimes that works out. Sometimes it doesn't. What to begin with is another thing. As an actor, I always liked it when you'd begin with, I don't know, some sort of, establishing shots, or like a day of establishing shots where you're just walking in and out of buildings, or you get to wear the wardrobe and you get to move around in it, and it counts, so you have to pay attention, but you're not doing any real heavy lifting yet. But that's always a tricky thing. I've never felt that thing that you just have to throw out everything you shoot on day one, because it's never good. And I always, I'm fortunate to usually have a good rehearsal period, and I will particularly drill down on day one in rehearsal. So often if you've been able to do enough, it sort of feels like, oh, now we just brought some cameras in, because maybe you've already rehearsed it. Maybe you even rehearsed it in the wardrobe. Maybe the day of the makeup and hair test, you run that scene. There are ways to sort of take the curse off of that really being day one.
And knowing that the actor may have a real serious emotional scene, it's coming up.
Yeah.
Some actors look forward to that. Some actors do not. And you as an actor obviously know that anxiety that comes. Where are you again, this is sort of the scheduling issue. Where are you in that?
Well, Bill Connor, who's I should say, he started off with ADs. I did a quick count here. Jan Lloyd, I did 2 TV movies, Night Shift, Splash, Cocoon, and Gung Ho. Six projects with Jan Lloyd. I did 9 films with Aldrich Porter as the first, and I've done 9 films with Bill Connor as the first. But he also started working for Aldrich Porter as a PA and working his way up to being Aldrich's second. So I don't quite know how many projects I've directed that Bill's been on, but a lot.
Right.
All that said, wait, what was your question?
The emotional scene, when an actor has a real tough one, and where are you going to put it? And how are you dealing, and also how are you dealing with the fact that actor may be, I'm really worried about this scene.
Yeah. Well, on those days, and we just finished Hillbilly Elegy, where every day, 3 days a week, I was kind of reminding the crew in Atlanta, who are great, by the way. But Bill Connor does a thing in the morning. It's he even was doing this before we had, safety meetings, but it now combines with the safety meeting. But it's just a quick rundown of everything we're doing today and everything we're doing tomorrow. And it takes, 5 or 10 minutes. But if anybody has a question, they know to be anticipating the scenes, and maybe they've looked at the schedule, maybe they haven't. But by getting it out in the open and talking about it, it gives me a chance to throw in a few words about it. But it also, I repeatedly remind the crew, and they know I know, that certain scenes are really performance driven. And these are not the scenes where somebody can be blurting out a joke. These are not the scenes where we're gonna rush through it. And we're not going to save it to the end of the day, and we're not going to be loud, and that kind of. And so, the crew themselves knows how to help me, create that environment. And so, like when Bill has his meetings, that's my opportunity to say, this is the, Amy Adams has some 2 killer scenes today. Let's look after Amy, and let's keep it quiet and keep the environment, so that we make this as easy for her as possible.
And
but using somebody like Amy Adams or Cate Blanchett or Tom Hanks or Russell Crowe or and Glenn Close, who I've now worked with twice. I kind of look forward to those scenes because those people usually blow my mind. They, and I kind of know they're going to, and that's part of it, is how are they going to blow my mind? And they might have some emotional difficulty. They might balk a little bit, but, I really don't remember very many moments that were key for an actor, whether they were a big comedy scene, performance moment, or drama, where I didn't go away feeling like they killed it. And I guess that's partly what I pride myself on, is creating that environment where they can really excel. They can deliver in the way that they would hope they could.
And in setting up, it's interesting, I'm thinking of some comedy moments rather than, let's say, the emotional, dramatic moments where you want to get, those moments of humor. You've got some, I'm thinking in a number of moments in Splash, you've got some really, really gifted human beings.
Yeah.
Do you step back?
Yes. I step back. Well, I generally don't give a lot of direction for the first couple of takes anyway. I kind of see what they're up to. We've talked about the scene during rehearsal probably and so forth, but I try to stay out of their way in the beginning, and then make adjustments more than sort of, because it's better when they don't have to think about a direction. It's better when they own it. But I feel that translates to all the key departments. I really feel that there's a great moment in prep where you can start to feel it when we've talked about it, we've looked at locations, we've kicked ideas around, we've seen all the research stuff, we've talked, we've debated, we've arrived at some decisions. They know what I'm looking for, and I've been informed by what their creativity suggests it could be, and embraced it or explain why I think, and reinforce my own point of view by being able to talk about what it is I think we're going for and get them excited about it. And suddenly everybody's pulling in the same direction, and sort of the batting average of everyone's suggestions really goes up at that point. Because everybody's seeing the same movie and pulling in the same direction. So that's exciting for me. With certain actors, Michael Keaton, John Candy, I did it with Wilford Brimley with drama. Russell Crowe at times in certain kinds of scenes. Jim Carrey, unbelievable physical comedian. Incredible. That's more about, again, creating that environment and then letting them riff, letting them do what they do. And often, you in that kind of situation, you have a B camera just dedicated to following them wherever they go, because you don't want them to have a hard mark. You don't want them to be worried about that.
Got it. When you're talking about character, particularly in that rehearsal time, what's the discussion? You mentioned already sort of, I'll call it prior circumstances of who somebody is. I'm not talking about the actor human being. I'm talking the character that actor is going to portray. But in rehearsal, what's, like in Cinderella Man, where, characters are going to actors not only going to have to change their technical capacities, style of voice, sound of voice, but also to, create characters that may not be quite as similar to, and also in Beautiful Mind, not as similar to who they actually, quote,
right.
are. So therefore, there's a discussion or there's a development of who this character is. And I'm wondering what's the language, what's the process that you go with them as they go through the process of discovering who this person is?
Well, with actors in, lead roles or key supporting roles, that conversation usually begins during the casting process. Where especially, they're at a moment where they're trying to decide whether they want to do it or they're selling themselves to me and the producers. It's under that pressure. It's good to know what they think of the character and how they do see themselves, sort of as that character. And you can begin to imagine that. So part of the casting process is often saying, I like their take. I may like that they're a movie star. I've always loved their work, but it's also, I think they have an interesting handle on this. Or I think they're seeing it wrong. Let's have a conversation to see if they agree.
Now, that's the conversation I'm wondering about.
Well, that's saying, I know you said X, Y, and Z, but, based on the script and what I'm sensing, and also maybe some research I've done or something, I feel like the character is more, in this other emotional space, or has this other pervasive attitude about the world or the idea that I think is different than what you're talking about, and then get that conversation going. And then often they'll say, yeah, I get it. I see what you're talking about. And again, if it's a kind of an Amy Adams or one of these sort of chameleon type actors, they can get there. All they need to do is hear it.
When you say emotional space, which is I love both of those phrases. One, attitude about the world, because I can understand that. But in emotional space, I understand too. But we can be specific. The emotional space that you knew that this character in Beautiful Mind was going to be in. Now, maybe Russell came in and said to you, I know what it's like to live in an imaginary world and be frightened and antisocial, and you're getting these things, or maybe not. I'm wondering if we were there, the dialogues that would have gone between the two of you in helping that character come alive.
Well, boy, that was a great creative opportunity for me, because Russell was so gifted and he was still emerging. And in some ways, because he was just coming off Gladiator, in fact, the first day of shooting was the day after the Oscars, and he still had it in his gym bag. And he'd flown all night to get there, but we had to shoot because it was Princeton, and we needed every day. So, we had to make him fly and shoot. But I was in a way certainly the first Hollywood director who sort of had the pleasure of saying, I think you're great, and I really want to know what your opinion is about this, and I want to work with you. But also during the process, shape it, debate it, and develop that kind of collaboration. But some of it was also research and discovery. Also, Akiva Goldsman, who was the screenwriter, was there. His parents were shrinks. Akiva had an intimate sense of all of this. So some of it was just engaging Akiva and kind of understanding what this guy was going through in his mind as the writer. So we had these great sort of three-way conversations about it. But we had a big breakthrough based on some research where we began to understand the affects of the common affects of schizophrenia. Some of them are sort of twitches, itches, and some of them are also then the intensity of hallucinations and things like that. So we kind of understood that. And then I was able to engage Russell, and I wanted to shoot that movie along with Roger Deakins. I'd worked out this approach, which was sort of three different looks. It's like there are three different periods in his life. And the first one, nobody knows he's mad. And he certainly doesn't. He just knows he's in angst. We just think he's an eccentric, kind of irascible genius. But what Russell and we shot it kind of like Life magazine, Life in the 50s, and the academic elite and so forth. And during that period, there was this angst because he felt a lot of pressure and ambition, the character. Russell certainly related to that. I also had taken Russell to watch two PhD candidates working with their prof, their advisor. These are theoretical mathematicians, and they were talking through it, and we're watching and so forth. And it was early in the process, And Russell kind of kept looking over at me, looking back, and we're watching these guys talk and write and on the chalkboard, erase things and come back and get excited. And we took a break. We're outside and Russell's smoking a cigarette, and he kind of, we don't know each other that well yet. And he kind of looks at me and he says, "These guys are making me feel like fucking morons. Do you understand what they're saying? Because I don't." And I said, "I don't have a clue. But do you notice how he's holding the chalk?" And we got into a discussion where I said, "Well, this is their language, and it's, you know, to us it means nothing, but to them it's like music." And Russell can read music, I can't. I said, "But you know, that's a language to you that I don't understand." And so that's all that is. And so this is creativity. And you're a songwriter and a musician and an actor, and we understand art, we understand creativity, and that drive to achieve something. So that whole first act was about that, but we got to start to play the game of hinting at the affects. So what Russell and I both landed on this one day, that he'd make them into cute little eccentricities. But later in the movie, we'd see the same affects the way you would if you were watching a documentary about people who were institutionalized, who were deeply troubled. And that opened up at sort of a particular door, I think, for Russell. And then we began to just deal with his mindset. You know, in the beginning, it's sort of all anxiety. Then we sort of shot the middle part as kind of noir, Ed Harris and the CIA, and he feels, and that's all about sort of self-aggrandizement and feeling like you're a part of a great adventure. And then the third part was this raw, awful truth of reality, the harsh, cold light of reality, which is, what you ought to aspire to, but it's really difficult. If you're, you've had this other, which is something that John Nash himself talked about. So conversations with John Nash, this research, all of it sort of informed Russell. It's a very long answer, sorry. But it led to a language that we understood and a kind of a gradation. And then I started sort of over-directing him. And he said, "Hey, Ron, just let me make this be like jazz. I'll start small and I'll build up. And I know you'll find it in the editing room. You'll piece it together." And he trusted that. And I trusted him, and he did some really mind-blowing things in that.
What I appreciate a lot here is both the research and the collaboration and the understanding that it is an evolutionary process, that you don't have it all figured out before you walk on.
Just because you like the script doesn't mean you understand everything about it yet.
I want to talk about. There's so many things I want to talk about, but. I want to talk about directing kids, but I want to talk about camera first here for a second. Okay. Challenges that you've had. Well, first of all, you've had many, many different styles of use of the camera. I mean, literally, as you just said, even within this particular movie, there were 3 different lighting styles as well as 3 different uses of the camera. Mm. When you first are giving yourself notes on whatever project it is, and now I'm talking about the visual notes as distinguished from the notes about character. What are you saying to yourself? What notes are you giving yourself that will then inform? And what are the challenges that you could sort of share with us in that particular issue, which is meaning how you're staging it for camera, what your visual sensibilities go through?
Well, I'm, in the beginning, almost everything just was sort of from the perspective of characters and having been and acting, so most movement, most of these things were to make scenes work for the actors in my mind, and I would sort of play them in a way and understand that, and to this day I'm facile with staging because I can sort of fall into and anticipate what's going to work for an actor in a moment, particularly younger actors especially, but as I've developed and continue to develop, the visual language is something that I've spent quite a bit of time, trying to get better at, trying to use in more interesting ways, and it sort of reflects itself in the notation that I'll put in the script. But I begin to feel at a certain point once we know we're the scenes are more or less working, I sort of stop thinking about the characters and the beats and the logic of the narrative. And I do start to sort of see it a little bit and feel it and think that certain things should be, presented against a certain kind of landscape, or maybe the character should be small, so that suggests it's a wide shot, or this is a place where you'd want to see these two characters interacting and you wouldn't want to be interrupted with cutting, so that means hold that two shot, or are they moving, things like that. But on one of your panels years ago, I was on the same panel with Ridley Scott. I've always admired, and after we'd broken up, we went back into the room there and we were having a coffee or whatever. I said to Ridley, you're just so visual. I know you were a production designer. I really admire it. And you always seem to come up with something kind of fresh and exciting, and approach to something. This might have been right after Gladiator or something. And they're sitting in that room. He said, man, it's pretty easy. He said, sit with your DP and watch movies and borrow ideas. He said, you're not ripping anybody off because your scene is not that scene, but there's something about that applies. Well, apply it. It's all language. It's all, and he said, when I learned to do that, I learned to make scenes more distinctive and not just kind of because it came out of my head.
Well, let's talk about that idea. You've been very facile with chase scenes and car scenes. Mm-hmm. You've made a car movie like Rush, but you started with a sort of a car movie, if you would say.
Yes.
And there's still, the fact that you had that smart car in Da Vinci is still one of my favorite moments as the car was riding through those trucks. Staging those scenes, figuring those out. Let's take the smart car scene for a second in that chase. There's some very specific tricks. She's driving backwards. Can you talk about how you're talking to your special effects people, to your stunt people, the rest, and visually to your camera people, so that you're going to get, as you just said, it's going to reference other movies, but it's going to be its own.
Well, that was really a long, difficult process because it was really before you could CGI a car. You couldn't. We had to physically do all this stuff, and so we couldn't shortcut by just creating a CGI car for a moment to do something extraordinary. Todd Hollowell was the second unit director on that, as well as being the executive producer. He was actively involved in laying that out. We worked with a car stunt group in France who were particularly gifted at this. And we also knew which locations we wanted to work with. So I think it was a little bit like Harold Lloyd or Buster Keaton kind of, walking onto a street and saying, well, look at this. I could climb up the side of this ladder. And we started using the geography of the street that we were allowed to work on. And we just kept pitching bits and ideas and then reverse engineering that mechanically so that we could actually, execute that scene. Todd shot most of it. I came in and did coverage, but it was all carefully planned. Roger Corman gave me the best advice on Grand Theft Auto. And I was concerned. He always insisted that young directors, and that was my first film, diagram the blocking and in advance. He wants to see your diagrams. If you can storyboard, but if you couldn't, which I can't do, then you do just diagrams. And I was struggling.
Are you talking about overhead?
Yeah, overhead diagrams. Character moves from here to here. Here's the desk. There's the door. This would be one shot. That's an over the shoulder. This is a master. And how many, roughly how many setups it's going to be and that sort of thing. And I was struggling with the cars. And Alan Arkish was going to be the second unit director and was the second unit director. And in fact, Joe Dante was the editor on that movie. So there were a lot of talented people.
By the way, some of these questions I'm asking are coming from some of those talented people.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
So I want to credit that these are not just all mine. There's been members who have said, "Can you ask him this?" Go.
Well, I talked to Roger about it at one point, and I said, the acting scenes I really understand and I feel okay. And he was looking at my diagrams, and I said, I'm talking to Alan quite a bit, but I'm struggling a little bit with the car scenes. And he said, they're all scenes, Ron, and they're all characters. So, think of a car scene the way you'd think of as a fight scene between two people. Or, a car chase is no different than a foot chase. They're in relationship to one another, and they're characters. And I think if you just block it and shoot it that way, that's going to be fine. And then, you could do some pickups to give the feeling of speed, a low angle, and the car drives by fast just to give it energy, or the speedometer. But basically, they're characters. And so many times back on Rush, 30 years later, I couldn't help but think of what Roger taught me in that one sentence. And one explanation that I was still applying and making use of.
I got it. I asked you sort of to take on some challenges, and both logistic, character, and actor, also staging and camera. I'm wondering if there are any others that you reminded yourself of that we can share in these last minutes.
Well, I may have, the weightlessness in Apollo 13 was a real thrill, but it was and it was a very effective, but it was a real culmination of understanding that you could plan things carefully enough, because we'd have about 40 or 50 parabolas in this KC-135, this weightless, that does parabolas, this Air Force plane, that creates weightlessness. They're really just diving down, and the human beings inside are free falling. Wow. But because there's no wind or anything, it approximates weightlessness. And liquid and things like that, behave the way they do in space. So it's great for all of that. And we decided if we locked down our set and shot, we could create weightlessness. So we had each parabola was about 23 seconds. Of weightlessness. We learned you could get yourself organized, and you could shoot about 17 seconds of that. So we started breaking that down, and storyboarding, of course, but also, rehearsing with the actors in gravity, which was a little tricky. And the other thing is we were only able to bring a crew of 11 up. So, the actors sort of had to look after their own props and pay attention to things. And, it was a tiny, tiny group. But because when I'd done Splash and then Cocoon underwater, I had found that of course, it was very difficult to communicate. There were no comm systems then that would work underwater. We had a tank that you could sort of swim over to and take your regulator and blow the water out of this inverted tank so you could get in underneath and have a conversation, which was unbelievably time consuming. Tried not to do too much of that. And I learned that if you rehearsed up top, even Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah, who didn't even have masks under there, could be led through the shots, and you could say to them, this is shot number 1, this is shot number 3. And they were smart enough, and we rehearsed enough for them to recognize what it was they needed to do. And I could lead them through it. And anyway, we worked it out. Magic Hour shots. I did a whole sequence in Far and Away with Audrey Porter as the AD, where every day we would run to this particular location. It was for the finale of the land race. Right. And we would, we'd literally have about, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes of great light. Some days, you wouldn't get the light and you just would die. So we'd go shoot, 3/4 of a day and then run over and then spend about 45 minutes or an hour blocking out the shots, setting up the camera, and then basically doing these 2-minute drills. So I did this for various, shows. And when it came time to do Apollo, I realized that we could do that. So we didn't have that many days where we were allowed to be weightless, but I wound up getting to shoot the master or a 2-camera master for every weightless scene, every scene. And it was great because and the actors committed to it, but we did it like this kind of rolling 2-minute drill. That was a huge challenge, but a great achievement.
What achievement, without a question. So you would actually rehearse not in the weightlessness to then do the weightlessness.
Yeah, and then we had a little mock-up set over here on the side.
I feel like this is a sort of I'm about to be sort of like a metaphysical water and fire. I mean, you have dealt with both of them repeatedly. If you were now to say to somebody, okay, you're going to be shooting a period piece on water, like in the heart of the sea, or backfire in fire, what have you learned about both of these energies to be able to make them work? You explained obviously what you did in Splash, but I'm curious.
It's much easier because of digital, because of CGI. And on Heart of the Sea, we did shoot quite a bit in tanks, but we also shot a lot out on the open ocean, not far away from shore. But here's the beauty of it. When I was doing Splash or Cocoon, and you were on the water, and you're trying to get the relationship between two boats, or you're trying to get an acting moment in the right light with the right weather, something would always screw it up. A boat would appear in the background. A jet would fly around with a contrail, or something would screw it up. And it's not the big stuff. It's the fact that just because in chasing the light, you came around and you catch a little bit of land now in the horizon, that doesn't destroy your scene now. So you can fix that, and it's minimal cost and no compromise to the image. And so, to me, both fire, which has gotten a lot safer, finally it works. You still have to work with some fire. It's not 100% convincing. But I would never work with the volume of fire that I did on Backdraft again. And working on the water, it's still slow, but it's not remotely as problematic, as it used to be. And when you do go to a tank, you have a pretty good chance of it being convincing now, whereas before it was such a compromise.
I want to ask a question about kids and working with kids. You grew up this way, and as I said, there was that one moment in Parenthood, which I think the kids in Parenthood are pretty amazing, and there've been other kids that you've worked with in lots of your movies, but that particular moment still sticks out for me, where the kid sort of has this fit. How do you deal with kids, or do you deal with them any differently than you deal with any other actor? Where are you in that?
Not that differently. I mean, my dad was sort of gifted at teaching, young people to act. My brother and I were the only recipients of that gift. But it's clear to me that he had, and one of the things was that he really trusted, us as to understand what the scene was. Now, unless they're like 3, and in that case, you're casting a personality and a look, and you're trying to capture their natural, reactions to things and editorially trick it around. I mean, one simple idea is when your kids are unpredictable and are going to, they stage the scene over their shoulder, more or less. So let the adults, make the scene work, and then put yourself in a situation so that you can take all the time you need to do those reverses and make that blend seamlessly, into the scene. But the adults are not dependent on the child's timing or response, and that liberates the you to work with that child. And to get those moments, whether that comes by giving line readings or whether it comes by not saying a damn thing and letting them go because they somehow intuitively get it. You just have to observe where they are and don't presume to know how you're going to get them all. They're there because you think they're right for it.
Do you remember that moment in Parenthood with that moment?
Yeah, and he was a very shy kid. and it did take a few takes to get there, but he had this wonderful vulnerability to begin with. So the reality is, he didn't have to go that far to get us to understand it, believe it, and feel it. It was also, beautifully written. So the things he had to say were, in and of themselves, pretty heartbreaking.
The issue of when you get anxious or when you have doubts, how do you handle it?
Sometimes the assistant director says, it's going to be all right. That's why it's good to work with a trusted assistant director, because they actually they have the agency to take you aside and say, you're making everybody a little nervous with your pacing now, Ron. We're going to get it, or we're not going to get it, but you're actually not helping now. Which no one's ever said it quite that directly or harshly, but I get it, and I appreciate it when they do talk me off the ledge. I feel highly adrenalized all day. I don't think I show it, but from the time I get out of the car and I'm there, I'm pacing, I'm moving, I still work that way. And so I am always thinking ahead. I am thinking about the time, not because I'm trying to be necessarily that cost efficient. I care about the budget. I'm responsible, but what I really care about is the space to make the scenes work, the space in the day to be able to change your mind, to come up with a new idea, to respond to somebody's, great suggestion. And so what I never want to do is sort of shift back and kind of the easy stuff that we could have moved through. I don't like to take the foot off the gas there. I like to use that as an opportunity to create some space in case later on in the day we need it.
Got it. This is my last question because of the timing that we've got. It's sort of a fascinating one in a way because it has to do with editing and it has to do with imagery. But the opening sequence in Inferno, there are people wearing masks on the street.
Right.
This is about a virus.
Yeah.
My interest is that the images that you were imagining, and some of them obviously were references to the paintings of the time,
yeah.
Are incredibly powerful, including regular masks or masks of the people's faces on the back of their heads.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in, because you're also a documentarian, the relationship between the imagination and what really is happening, and how you're responding to just that combination of imagination and reality right now.
Well, I ought to go back and take a look at that sequence. Yeah, you're so right. Of course, those were plague masks, in their most extreme, and we were certainly dealing with a perpetrator trying to create a plague. But I've drifted into the documentaries and found it to be so wonderful. And I say often I'm kind of a literalist. I tend to want to understand just sort of in the most logical way how things work. But over the years, I've come to understand that then perception is something else. So there's the sense of what kind of the general consensus of how a thing works and what's known to be the truth or the facts. And then there's the individual experiencing it. And I've come to understand that there's this kind of schism sometimes between the two. And often the characters who are under duress, being tested, being challenged, being worthy of being central characters in a movie, are often at a place where they might not be seeing the world quite the way everyone else is. They might not be feeling it in as literal a way as most everyone else. And I think that we can all relate to those moments. And I think it separates them, makes them compelling, stirs empathy for them, creates some fascination around them. And I think that's then if you can find ways of shooting, staging, editing, scoring to try to suggest that feel particular to that character, that can be, that can make for scenes that transport you, which is, I think, is, whether it's a documentary and it's really all the facts, or it's absolute fiction, or broad zany comedy, what you really want are moments that transport you and make you feel something about that all at once.
Well, let's put it this way.
That's what I go for.
You do it so well. They say challenges are what make life interesting, but overcoming them is what makes life meaningful. You've done it so well for so many of us. And thanks, Ron, for sharing this time. Please stay safe and stay sane. And we all appreciate your taking this time to be with us, man. It's
a pleasure. Thanks very much. Hang in, everybody. Hang in. We're I'm an optimist. I hope you are too. Okay. Take care.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That wraps up this exclusive discussion with Ron Howard. If you'd like to hear more from the Craft of the Director series, check out episode 27, which features director David O. Russell discussing his filmography. Or visit our YouTube page to find discussions with Leslie Linka Glatter and Guillermo del Toro. Also, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow film buffs find the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.